One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. In order to make a proper beer, one must use 4 core ingredients. That's water, malt, hops, and yeast. Over centuries of brewing, these 4 ingredients have been used to create hundreds of styles that vary widely in their range of flavors. However, for many, this just isn't enough. Some feel it necessary to adulterate their beer with myriad things, from simple to totally bizarre, with the goal of creating something unique. This is the Brewlosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this Brews Views episode to discuss our unabashed opinions about using such adjuncts in beer is contributor Andy Carter.
It's funny, when I started getting into craft beer, the crazy hot thing was hops, right? You think hops, and hops have been around forever. Before hops was spices, and now spices have gotten, they're less used, the gruit and things like that. But I would say in the last 10 years, I would think there's a short list of things that haven't been added to beer, for better or worse, and it's kind of gotten, it's in a weird place right now, and I think there's a lot of opinions, and that's what I'm here to talk about with you, because I think it's a myriad of options and opinions today.
Yeah. And there are some pretty strong opinions about this one. I got into craft beer when I was living up in Bellingham, Washington. And at the time, the only commercial example I regularly drank that was made with anything other than malt, hops, water, and yeast was this beer called Mac and Jack's African Amber. I don't think you can get it anywhere outside of the Western Washington area. But I'm pretty sure it was made with like orange peel or something like that. Of course, there was always Belgian wit. That was around back then. Though, things like Blue Moon wasn't terribly easy to come by back then. Cut to today with all of the hyper-fruited milkshake slushy fruit bombs, and it's obvious things have changed quite a bit. We're going to be getting into our thoughts about the increased reliance on adjuncts in this show. Now, just a word of caution we give in every Brews Views episode, seeing as this is the series where we share our honest thoughts. We do tend to be a bit more off the cuff and may use language that some may not be terribly fond of. If that's you, just consider yourself warned. All right, if you enjoy this show and would like to make sure it sticks around, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished recipes, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Just a heads up, for the month of October, the Yakima Valley Hops discount, it's $5 pledge for $10 off a pack of their newly packaged canned hops. So hops in a can. Pretty cool deal. And coming up in October for our Q&A live cast guest is going to be overall brewing guru but water chemistry expert Martin Brungard, who is well known as the creator of the wonderful Brew and Water spreadsheet. Martin has been around the brewing scene for a long time, and this is going to be an absolutely excellent session. To be a part of it, be sure to make your pledge at patreon.com/Brewlosophy by October 23rd, 2020, which will also grant you access to past sessions with guests like John Palmer, Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, and Grandmaster BJCP Judge Gordon Strong. You can learn more about becoming a patron and see all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're doing your shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers beautiful stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique purpose-built products useful to both professionals and home brewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That's brewershardware.com. Listener Lee Bjornstrand wrote in seeking some clarification on something we talk about quite a bit. He says, I've listened to all the podcasts, and there's something that pops up from time to time I'm hoping you can shed some light on. When keg-to-keg liquid transfers are talked about, it's always mentioned to put a PRV on the gas outpost. Why is this? What's wrong with just opening the PRV on the lid?
That's a good question. I tend to have I have a mix of kegs. I have both corny both pin and ball lock kegs. So not all of my kegs have a top lid removal where you can just pop the gas out. So I tend to just put a gas out or gas in, quick disconnect on my gas just to make sure the pressure doesn't, get too high. Now, the other part of this is you'll build up pressure as you put liquid in that next keg, and then the two pressures will equilibrate, and you will not be able to flow liquid anymore.
Yeah.
So you have to purge that gas somehow. So you can either do it the kind of one way to do it is just to let it flow and then equilibrate, and then it'll go in slowly as you degas it, or you just pop a thing on the top of it and it'll degas itself. So pick one, but you have to get the gas out somehow.
So I have a feeling the nature of Lee's question, or what motivated it, is that he is a ball lock keg user, and people who use ball locks exclusively, I think, presume that they are exactly the same as pin locks with just a different post. That's not true. Pin lock kegs don't have a PRV on the lid. That's the simple answer to this question.
Yeah.
And so I only use pin lock kegs, so I knew that ball lock kegs had the PRV because all my friends use that, but pin locks were cheaper at the time I was building my Keyser. I know many ball lock kegs have PRVs that have the ability to stay open, and I believe Lee mentioned that as a side to his comment. So you can like pull the PRV up and twist it, and it'll stay open. Hey, if that does the trick, that does the trick. For me, because I don't want to do, have it, like you said, equalize the pressure and then have to purge that gas and let more beer flow, purge it again. I just throw something on the gas outpost and let it push the air out as it's filling up. Mm-hmm. Another simple solution is just a pop a gas disconnect, which most people have extra of those on that gas post, and leave it there. Boom, easy peasy, easy filling. But hopefully that answers your question, Lee. I can't imagine that you're the only one wondering why I bring that up so often. And that's why. It's because I use pin lock kegs. So, well, if you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a line on social media. One classic style of beer that's made with no adjuncts at all, given the nature of this episode, is German Pilsner, a personal favorite of mine. Now, knowing this, listener Joel Miller sent me a can of Bingo Lager from Bingo Brewing Company out of Richmond, Virginia. As I often do, I saved that can to share with my friends who I thought might enjoy reviewing it. But, well...
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Go, Timmy.
We got a nice looking beer here.
Yep.
Let's see what it tastes like. Yeah, kind of weird smell. It's dry. Not bad, Jersey. What do you think? Are you live? Wake up. This is the quietest beer review ever, Jersey.
Cue 'em up. Cue 'em up. Dude, I'm ready.
It's got a good smell. Kind of like a candy-ish. I can't figure out what the smell of that is.
Check.
Short and sweet. I think they enjoyed it, though. It sounded like at least one of them did.
Yeah, Jersey may have tapped out, but I wasn't tapped out at that point, and I took some notes on the beer. Sometimes you get to the end of a review session and you're just a little bit hazy. That was definitely Jersey on that session, but I thought Bingo Lager was absolutely delicious. Nice bready malt backbone with a really well-balanced floral hop character. I could have drank the hell out of Bingo Lager. It's one of those all-day sit by the pool drinking beers. But the brewery, Bingo Brewing Company out of Richmond, Virginia, describes it as a German-style lager with a modern twist, crisp and perfectly balanced with slight floral and citrus in the finish. They don't say much else on their website about that beer, but I'm assuming the modern twist that they're speaking of is the use of possibly like a more fruity American hop variety. Either way, it was a great beer. And I've had a lot of homebrewed pilsners, quote unquote pilsners, that are made with again more pungent American varieties, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, I think so. Around me, they're more up and coming. They've been around for a while. Enegren Brewing, one of their flagship, German lagery pilsnery things is called Lagertha, and it uses Mosaic. But they use so little of it, just that little whiff of it, that you're getting all that great grain and lager character, but you get that nice little fruity edge, which is I think it's just perfect. And they really pick really nice Mosaic, so it's just great.
Yeah. I have a buddy who made it was just a standard, like, I want to call it an American Pilsner because of the hops used, but it wasn't like a corn-laden, American Pilsner. It was just a kind of a classic Pilsner that was made with Cascade hops, and not too much, but just that kind of moderate amount that really, imparted a really pleasant grapefruit note, but not overpowering like you'd expect in a pale ale. It works really well, and so Bingo Brewing Company out of Richmond, Virginia. Great job. Joel, thank you so much for sending that in for me and Tim to drink. If you'd like to have your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Tim and possibly Jersey, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. When we come back from this short break, our unabashed thoughts on brewing with adjuncts. Brewlosophy is headquartered out of Fresno, California, a quaint city in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which has been ravaged by wildfires this season. Closest to home is the Creek Fire. In fact, I was camping with my family when it started, and we all had to be evacuated. This fire has grown to become the largest wildfire in California's history, and most of the structures destroyed were primary residences. Rebuild Our Sierra is a grassroots, long-term fundraising effort created by a few dedicated mountain people with the goal of helping those who have been affected by this wildfire. They know that when the smoke clears and the relief organizations move on, the mountains and foothills will need help to rebuild, revive, and renew. Find out more by following Rebuild Our Sierra on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to visit rebuildoursierra.org. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. I'm not even that old, but even I remember a time when brewers prided themselves on making beer that was clear, clean, and tasted like beer. Oddly, the opposite seems to be true today. Brewers are throwing pretty much anything they can find in the pantry at their beers, and consumers are drinking it up. What's crazy to me is how quickly this shift seems to have happened.
Yeah, so, I said I got into craft beer around 21. Hops were very big back then. Bitterness, pushing the IBUs, still using the top 4 ingredients. I think the rise of Blue Moon, that's an Americanized version of a Belgian Witz. It's a little sweeter. It definitely ups the flavor, assertive flavor. So I think what I saw is, or what I noticed is that the American craft beer scene grew out of flavor extension. And once you go through the first 4 ingredients, well, what else can we do to focus on these flavors and try to insert or make more assertive the base flavors of beer. And that's where we get into coffee and chocolate, and then why not just add those ingredients directly? And I think that's really where all this stems from.
There definitely seems to be this American phenomenon, if you will. And I think, I don't know, I live in America, so perhaps that's just my bias, but it's always pushing the envelope. And it's gotten us to a point today where, well, frankly, we've seen some pretty weird freaking beers out there. And people are throwing some weird stuff at it. But we have to honor tradition and the past. And the truth of the matter is stuff that we refer to as adjuncts today have actually been used in the brewing process for quite a while. Some nowadays we look at, and I think most people would say, oh, that's completely normal. If you want to use that, it's not a big deal. Because, they've been doing it for so long, it just feels like it's not so far, off the spectrum that it's weird, I guess. And I guess we can start with like simple adjuncts, things like different grains, rice, flaked maize, oats, stuff like that.
Yeah. So what you see, even the big guys, they talk about when they make beer, they mention rice or they mention corn, and those are not barley. So they do call them adjuncts, and so I think it's good to start there, because no one would say. Well, I think most people would say that Bud Light or Miller Lite or these light beers are still beers. They might call them water or something like that, but they still are, or pee, but they still are beer. And we've just said, okay, well, those grains are fine, and they tend to do something. In the case of light lager, this is to dry the beer out, to change the carbohydrate balance. So there is actually a real technical reason to use these things, and so that's why they do them. And then they have to do a process around them too. So in modern brewing or modern craft brewing, bringing in rice. A beer that comes to mind immediately for me is the breweries made a beer called the Trade Winds Triple that uses jasmine rice. I believe it's jasmine rice, but that rice adds kind of a coconutty kind of flavor to the beer that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Interesting.
So there's other reasons to use certain types of rice or certain types of near barley grains, still grains. Okay, we're still in the grain department right now. The things that grow out of the ground and are malted or not malted or mashed or cerealed or something.
Yeah.
And those, there's specific reasons. Another one like oats, oatmeal stout. Boom. I mean, that I don't think anyone in craft beer has not had an oatmeal stout, right? That's just so prevalent, so common now.
Yeah, and there's nobody out there who hates on oatmeal stout merely because of the fact that you used oatmeal in it,
Exactly.
Whereas with some of the other stuff we're going to be talking about, there are haters, and I look at things like flaked oats. I don't think. The way I view New England IPA, which is taken over the IPA world or the brewing world, really,
absolutely,
is in order to make a proper example of a New England IPA, you have to use more than just barley, and people are usually using either flaked oats or some portion of and form of wheat. Both technically adjuncts, but again, like you said, they're so normally used, and there's such a history of use with those grains that it doesn't feel like it's a weird thing that brewers are doing. I just made a cream ale. What's in cream ale? You cannot make a cream ale unless you use some portion of corn, and I also like to throw a little bit of rice at it, in order to get that really dry, crisp, basically American lager flavor, right? I mean,
yeah. I think that Genesee cream ale, and I believe Spotted Cow from New Glarus even. I mean, they're using. I'm looking it up right now. I believe they're all using these quote unquote adjuncts to make these beers, but these are considered classic styles.
Yeah, exactly.
In these categories. So
and another adjunct, and I feel like it's deserving of the term adjunct that is completely acceptable. In fact, it's highly desired for many styles is wood. Barrel aging. You and I have talked about barrel aging before, or using wood alternatives, whether that's cubes or chips. You are undeniably imparting flavor and unique characteristics to beer by aging it in or on some form of wood. That's adjunct in my book. That is completely acceptable to most people.
Absolutely. And wood comes from a history of, before we had steel and welding and all these great modern inventions, beer was either aged in wood, could be pitch line barrels, so they didn't really get the wood character, but still use wood in the process. But then you served out of wood. You served out of casks and tanks, and then much more modernization rather than doing it out of necessity. want to say, reading the history of barrel aging beers, one of the first commercial ones, and it is slightly debated, but I think the historians generally agree Goose Island was one of the first breweries to age beer in bourbon barrels.
Yeah.
They did it because of kind of just the, you have people that are thinking about how to do something new or how do we get these flavors, or how can I get these things? And if all the stars align and you can buy those barrels and get those barrels, then they did it, and boom. That style alone, other than like, let's say New England IPA, barrel aged beers, huge. Breweries founded, started, and are wildly commercially successful only because they sell barrel aged beers.
Yeah, that's what their focus is on, and exactly, and those beers are phenomenal. Again, it using a barrel, or using, if as a home brewer, if you don't want to get a 50-gallon barrel, using some sort of a wood alternative is deemed not just okay. It's almost like this. Oh man, that guy's a barrel guy. He's a wood guy. Like Matt Del Fiacco's a wood guy. It's like this highly lauded thing, and it's just interesting to me because as we move, into less simple and perhaps slightly more weird adjuncts, I think it serves us well to kind of as a reminder that there are things out there that you can get away with using that aren't, one of those 4 core ingredients, but that is okay to use. People aren't going to judge you for it. The final thing on my list of like simple adjuncts that are completely fine to use in beer are just the various different types of sugars. Of course, you've got sucrose and dextrose. That's like table sugar and corn sugar. But another one, and we talked about oatmeal stout. What about cream stout or milk stout? You gotta have a dose of lactose in that one.
Yeah, the lactose. I would say that may be the most common one, honestly, other than dextrose to dry a beer out. But lactose to add a little bit of that creamy mouthfeel to a milk stout. Another one, and I think this goes to also history of brewing. Belgian style beers all use candy sugar, beet sugar. Majority, I would say maybe not a total majority, but a good chunk of all their beers. In my mind, one of the most important ones that uses it is a strong golden ale, Duvel. You don't get the alcohol content and the bottle conditioning without adding that sugar. And so I would say defines the style. Now, also Belgian quadruple and triple to some extent, using those sugars to up the ABV modifies how the yeast ferment and get a little more of their ester profile out of it. I mean, yeah, those are critical things.
So I would say, I'm going to go on the record here and say that, different grains, using wood, using these various types of sugars. When I see a brewer do that, there might be a part of me that looks and says, oh, that's interesting. But I'm not thinking, ooh, gross,
No way.
Yeah. Or this person's trying to make a statement. I feel like, and that's a great thing. That's, when you talk about the art of brewing, one of those things is what can I create to kind of make a name, do something unique that I created. And I love that. But those things are in the realm of normal to me, adjunct as they may be. Now, by virtue of the fact that there just aren't that many classic beer styles that are spiced, even, we've got Belgian wit, of course, and that's usually coriander and orange peel, right? Classically, by virtue of the fact that there's Belgian wit and really not much else, maybe a Belgian triple was spiced as well. When I think of spices going into beer, that's first what comes to mind, but then right after that is pumpkin pie beers. And that moves into the out of the simple adjunct thing into the, absolutely. Ooh, maybe I'm going to be a judgmental prick on this one.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Well, what I get, as we progress now into the less common, there's an overriding concern in my mind when I see someone say, I spiced this.
Yes.
It is not a straightforward process. It is more like cooking and less like just running the mash and everything. And it can go many different directions. And I think you give a few people the same beer, their opinions on how that adjunct or that spice or whatever was added will vary very vastly. And it's just because of how people do this stuff. And it could be, it could go multiple directions. So I'm always a little more careful when someone says I added some spices.
And there's an adage that hops are the spice of beer, right? You use hops the way that you use spices in cooking. And so, perhaps it's because of my own kind of traditionalist bent, which I've never classified myself as a traditionalist, but I like beers. If there's going to be a certain characteristic in beer, there's something romantic to me about the fact that came from hops, yeast, malt, or water, And so when it's compensate, I feel like when you're throwing certain spices at beer, there's an element of compensation that's taking place, and I don't know why. It's my own hang up, but I don't know why that is so distracting to me. There's another thing and this is Brew's views, man. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't understand why anybody would ever throw clove at a beer. And you get into this season, autumn or fall, whatever you want to call it, and you start to see these beers that are, heavily spiced, and everybody wants to make something that tastes like a pumpkin pie or whatever.
Pumpkin spice lattes, baby.
Oh, yeah. Well, pumpkin spice brown ales and amber ales and IPAs, I'm sure, is going to happen this year. I don't understand. There are certain spices that just don't make sense to me. There are definitely adjuncts, and we're going to talk about this here in a sec, that make sense. You're like, oh, that's complementary to the beer. There is nothing complimentary about clove in a beer to me, unless you're drinking a saison or something, but then you just get it from the yeast, Yeah. And that's the part where I get hung up a little bit, is if I can produce this using yeast or hops or something, might as well do that instead of throwing spices at it.
I think there's an interesting, and this is where I think home brewing as a hobby is so personal, is that if you really like certain flavors, go crazy.
Yeah.
If you're trying to sell this, think about it. Measure twice, cut once. Yeah. Really take this to heart, because you do have to eventually return the profit if you're selling it, right? Again, if you're doing it at home, who cares? But if I go to the XYZ Brewing and it's a pumpkin spice latte with nutmeg and clove and cinnamon, I'm like, I might get 2 ounces of that. I'll probably stop at an ounce.
You're braver than I am, Andy. I usually just ignore them.
I give them a shot. I give one a shot. I'll give it one a shot, and then I'll be done for the season. So, I just, that kind of stuff, it gets, and I like we say on other shows about sensitivities to certain ingredients or certain off flavors, clove, big one. I think, that can be very prominent. And unless it's like the clove container was resting next to the boil kettle, unopened, maybe I'll taste it, maybe I won't, but I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So I'm with you on that one. I don't think it should go into the beer.
But here's the thing, again, as a word of us being equivocal as possible, do what you want with your beer. This is our opinions.
Absolutely. Exactly.
I've never had, as far as I know, I'm sure I've drank beers that were spiced that I just didn't pick it up maybe, and I enjoyed the beer. I don't know. But I've never had a beer that's been spiced with either pumpkin pie spice or some blend of cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg and all that doesn't make my tongue feel sort of numb after drinking it. There's this weird sensation that I get that I don't like, on top of the fact that I think it tastes like shit. So it's just like this double negative for me. Now, I will say this. I have had beers that have definitely had coriander, cardamom. I've had beers. There was this Belgian triple that somebody shared with me a while back that had these spices in it that, I'll tell you, it really complemented the beer. So I'm not completely 100% against it. I just feel like there's certain spices, and one of those big ones for me is clove, that just doesn't belong in beer. For the beers that I'm drinking, I think you use too much and it starts to taste almost licoricey. You even just a whisper of it to me leaves that weird mouthfeel. It's just not my thing. Now, there are definitely adjuncts that I feel make sense why somebody would use them in beer. One of those, and you can't go into a brewery without seeing it these days, is coffee.
Absolutely. Coffee, I think, especially now, they call the third wave of coffee. Really, I think we've gotten to a new wave of coffee. I'm not sure. Maybe we can ask Ray Found about what wave of coffee we're on. But
coffee nerd, yeah,
coffee, or resident coffee expert. The coffee is, you can get great cups of coffee now. There's tons of little tiny shops that have really nice, really well produced coffees, and so it makes sense. Not only from their perspective of, hey, a stout, it already has that bitter chocolate coffee flavor. Let's reinforce that. And I would say of all the adjuncts we'll talk about today, I think coffee-based beers are some of my favorite, because it doesn't just work in stouts. I was at the brewery down in Anaheim. This was like 5 years ago. They were doing pilot batches of a brown ale. It was like a hoppy red or a hoppy brown. But then each one had a different coffee and a different treatment of coffee. So espresso this and cold brew that and pour over this. Every single beer was different. Same base beer, each one could not be more different from the next. It was amazing. So really, I think coffee is a great thing because A, familiar to many people, and B, I think the options are really wide on the coffee stuff. I just love it.
Yeah. So in the beginning, and I admit my faults here. Whenever a new trend starts, I'm usually pretty skeptical about it. Coffee was one of those. Coffee's been going into beer for a while. I mean, that's, but I know that there's a beer out east. I believe Phil Rusher has access to it. And I forget who brews it, but it's called like Coffee and Cream or something. And it's like an imperial cream ale, that has coffee in it.
Oh, it's a Carton Brewing, and it's called Regular Coffee.
Regular coffee. That's right. Yeah.
And it's a 10% cream ale because it's supposed to replicate what's called regular coffee out east, which is like a cream and 2 sugars or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's really like white when you get it. It's not really coffee anymore. It's mostly milk and sugar with a little bit of coffee in it. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've heard great things about it. I know Phil likes it. He's brewed a version of it for one of his experiments. Well, over here, I've got, access to House of Pendragon, and just this weekend, I went and did a socially distanced brew day with contributor Paul Amico, who's getting back to brewing for the Hop Chronicles, which is, as an aside, very exciting. And so before I went over to his house, I stopped off at House of Pendragon, which is just a block away from my place, and picked up a beer that they've got. It's called Seriously Black Oatmeal Stout. So not only does it have oatmeal in it, but he also doses it with coffee. And I'm telling you, it's probably one of my favorite beers he has on tap right now because of the way the balance of that coffee flavor, which is not overpowering. It doesn't taste like I'm drinking a cup of coffee. Nice. But it almost has this, you get the impression of chocolate, and I think that is because of the blend of the roasted malt plus that flaked oats plus the coffee. This really nice, well-balanced, creamy but dry-ish, pretty boozy. I think it's about 8%. And I absolutely love it. I didn't think I was going to like it when I first sampled it, but that coffee really contributes to this fullness of flavor in that beer. And I'd be really interested, in fact, I'll talk to Tommy about it, the brewer and owner of Pendragon, in tasting Seriously Black without the coffee in it. Because I wonder if I'd like it more or less, or if I'd even notice a difference.
Yeah, that's the best thing about, I think, the skill of adjuncting or spicing is that you have to design the beer around what you're going to add. And in general, coffee is going to add a little bit of bitterness, so you have to kind of tweak the base beer, and it all depends on what you want out of the final beer. But I would bet, and I've had the House of Pendragon stuff, and it's excellent. I think that they planned on adding the coffee, which changed the base beer, but it would be nice to try them side by side.
Yeah. That's the thing is, if you design, again, the art of being a brewer. If you design a beer to have coffee in it, you're going to make concessions on other ingredients, right? Because you don't want to overpower certain things. You want it to be well balanced. If you're a good beer designer, at the very least. Yes. I love it. Seriously Black. If you ever get the opportunity to drink it, man, drink it up. It's probably one of my favorite Pendragon beers. Now, another adjunct that it gets common use these days. In fact, Pendragon has another beer that has chocolate in it. I feel like this is where I struggle to jump on board, because I've yet to have a chocolate beer, a beer that has chocolate in it that I genuinely love. It's a struggle for me to get past what tastes to me like artificial chocolate flavor.
Yeah.
Even though you're using nibs or cocoa powder, which are very real, whenever chocolate is used in a beer, it tastes artificial to me. Like you've had those air fresheners that smell like chocolate, but they don't really smell like chocolate. That's what I get from those.
It's interesting, and it's similar to the discussion we're having now, but it's cherries, not chocolate. But there's sometimes, and this is something I just noticed. I've been making some cocktails, Manhattans and old fashions, and I got those really nice Luxardo cherries. They're like $1 a cherry or something like that, and I wanted to try them. And I tasted one. I'm like, wow, this is really cherry, but it's so cherry, it tastes like soda.
Yeah.
So who copped who? Did the soda companies make the perfect recreation of the Luxardo cherry, or am I so jaded on cherry flavor that this doesn't taste real? So it's so weird. And I think you're right. The chocolate stuff, I've done the nibs, I've soaked them in different things. So this is one thing I really like doing is, as a home brewer, is I make a beer, but I want to, tweak it up a bit, maybe do a split batch. And I've really experimented with, I think, all these adjuncts we're going to talk about, or at least the more common ones. And I'm in your camp in that I've drank and made a lot of chocolate-based beers, and I'm really not tasting the difference maybe not perceiving or really getting a difference when I add those ingredients, other than the fact that, hey, this has chocolate in it. Okay, cool.
It's funny you say it that way, because whenever I have a chocolate beer, I feel like that's the feature. It's like, hey, we made this beer, and guess what? There's chocolate in it. And it tastes like chocolate. Great. Well, it tastes like artificial chocolate to me.
Sure.
There is an element, and I think if you use a deft touch, there's an element of chocolate that can contribute not just chocolate flavor, but like a smoothness perhaps, or something that like rounds out the roasty edges of darker malts. I've got a question for you though. And I just recalled the Seriously Black that I was talking about earlier from Pendragon also has vanilla bean in it. What are your thoughts on vanilla in beer?
I like it, and I have mostly enjoyed it in commercial vanilla bean beers. I have, like nibs, cocoa nibs, at home, I've been struggling to recreate the same flavors. And that's, I think, only because I have so many experiences with vanilla beans and beer. I would say definitely in the top 10, top 5 commercial beers I've had from, especially one brewery in particular. They make a beer called Fundamental Observation. This is Bottle Logic in Anaheim. Their Fundamental Observation, really nice vanilla beer. And it can come off... Vanilla can come off, definitely in some cases to me, artificial, like vanilla extract. But when you do it correctly, it really sings. And so I've enjoyed them.
So vanilla is one of those things. It's one of those adjuncts for me that when it's used right, it is almost unnoticeable, because to me it contributes to a softening of the experience, which sounds really cheesy, but there's this element of vanilla that can be so complementary to a lot of different styles. But you overdo it, and again, it gets this weird artificial character that I'm just not a fan of. The other thing about vanilla is there are various types. I'd never really thought about it until I talked to this guy Paul from vanillapura.com. And you go to this website. If anybody who likes using vanilla, they're not a paid sponsor, I promise. Anybody who likes using vanilla in beer, go check out Vanilla Pura. That's Pura.com. You'll see they have got multiple different types of vanilla you can buy, and each one has a different description, And so who knows if I'm throwing, vanilla extract, what kind of vanilla was it made from? Was it Madagascar or was it some other one? And if they all have this different characteristic. So it's hard for me to judge this one too broadly because I just don't feel like I know enough about vanilla. But I will say, when used in tandem with things like coffee and chocolate, I actually think it helps to amplify the positive characteristics as other things can contribute.
Yeah, there's a lot of synergy. You rarely see these adjuncts alone. There's under only certain conditions do you see them alone, because I do think there's a lot of synergy with the base beer and with the other flavors. The one thing, it might be hard to find for people, they have it. They just came out a little bit ago. Modern Times released 4 different base stouts with each had a different vanilla bean in them, so they actually can try the different types of vanilla between all of them. The other thing with vanilla right now is it is incredibly expensive, so you're probably not going to see as many more vanilla beers out as you did, just because the market for vanilla beans is kind of going nuts right now. So, but in general, it's one I'm more common to buy a commercial version. I've been more hesitant lately to do vanilla at home, just because I'm not getting the flavors I want.
Well, for me, I would never want 5 gallons of any vanilla beer on tap at my house. It's just too rich for me, And I will say this again, probably an unpopular opinion here, but vanilla is one of, I think it's because of the name cream ale. There's nothing creamy about cream ale. I mean, but people seem to think that it's supposed to taste like cream soda or something. And so I can't tell you how many freaking cream ales that people threw vanilla at that I've tried that taste horrendous. That is just not. Sure. Now, again, completely subjective. I want pale yellow beers to taste like a freaking pale yellow beer. So I'm completely biased. When it tastes like a dessert, it turns me off. And so for me, vanilla is one of those things that if you're going to get away with it, it's going to be in a darker beer. And you add a little touch of vanilla to a spiced beer, I'm probably more likely to enjoy it because again, it balances out, it softens out some of those harsher, what I experience as like harsher spice notes and stuff like that. I'll tell you what, I have a buddy, his name's Wes Tarvin. He is one of the co-hosts of the Grill Coach podcast, good friend of mine, The dude, probably 7 or 8 years ago, brought a coconut porter that he made to just a meetup one time with some buds. And this beer was so incredibly delicious. And I love coconut. I like vanilla ice cream. Not a big fan of vanilla beers. Coconut in beer, my God, does it work well, in my opinion.
Yes. I am also a big fan of coconut. I think both of us like bourbon and coconut, vanilla, all that kind of stuff, all kind of come together. What I've had, my experience with coconut, I like it a lot. I like putting in my beers. It can have a deft hand, but I've also heard there of the adjuncts, the commercial guys that are really looking at adjuncts kind of more scientifically. Just because they make these beers, they have to sell them. They charge a lot, so they want to provide a good product.
Right.
Of the things they've played with, they believe their assessment is there might not be an upper limit to coconut in terms of negative effects other than beer loss, because the coconut is absorbing all of that beer.
Yeah.
So there is that one issue. I do have friends that coconut to them tastes like sunscreen. So there is that other side of coconut, which is if you're kind of just how you perceive it, you might never like a coconut beer just because it has like a sunscreen kind of vibe. So.
Well, I would contend sunscreen tastes like coconut. They're the ones who stole the characteristic to rub. But there is coconut to me, even when you're eating coconut, has a very creamy, vanilla-like flavor, aroma, and texture, really. It's just that full-on, the flavor of it I love so much. I've heard from a lot of people as well, they like coconut flavor. They hate chewing on coconut. They hate the way it feels in their mouth and it gets caught in your teeth. Drink coconut beers. Again, I've never had a coconut beer that's pale. All of the ones that I've had have been either, I've had a coconut brown ale, which was delicious. I've had coconut porter many times. Absolutely delicious. Coconut stout. It works. It works really, really well. In fact, I feel like coconut is one of those few things, and I don't say this often, it's one of the few things that you can use to cover up some flaws, it's strong enough, to overpower some certain small flaws maybe. I absolutely love it. I've never brewed with it, but what I've heard is in order to really capitalize on those coconutty flavors, you have to toast it first. You can't just go buy a bag of sugared coconut and toss it in your beer.
Highly recommended, and I think that's another thing of the tricks or secrets or whatever of these spicing and adjuncting beers. There might be some more work involved up front. I think that the Stone Brewing had said this. I forget if it was one of their spice beers or was Jogavesa. Is one of those beers they add coconut to, and at the time they didn't really have a lot of space, so they had to go to a different kitchen, toast all the coconut, racks and racks and racks and racks of coconut, bring it back to the brewery and all this stuff. So I mean, it's important. The only to the statement about the color of the beer and where it's ending up, I know we're going to say I'm definitely going to bring up the brewery in Anaheim a lot because this is one of the breweries that has done a ton of experimentation.
Yeah.
They did a beer with coconut, ginger, and a sour blonde. Really good.
Oh my God, it sounds really delicious.
Really good.
I will, another brewery shout out. They are so consistently amazing. Their sour beers and their barrel-aged beers is consistently amazing. And the creativity that some of these brewers have in their blending, I don't have that. I am not, I fully admit, I'm a copycat when it comes to those types of things. If I were to brew beers like this, I wouldn't be the one coming up with the ideas.
Sure.
But yeah, coconut and ginger and in a sour beer, that sounds phenomenal. Yeah. But coconut, definitely a plus for me. I absolutely love it. I could see it working really well in maybe a really low hopped Pilsner or even pale ale. You think of things like Brew One and Sabro and a lot of these really new hop varieties. A descriptor that goes along with them is coconut, this kind of vanilla coconut characteristic. And, I've had beers made with some of those new hops that taste like you had coconut dosed in them, and they're pale ales and they taste great. So not a bad idea maybe to toss some coconut at one of those. But I do think it's the same thing with spices. When you toast them up, when you get a little color on them, you are opening up those aromatics. I mean, that's the whole idea, right? So just don't forget to do that. I actually had I believe it was a porter made by somebody who sent me a beer who said he just tossed like 2 pounds of uncooked, untoasted coconut in the primary fermenter, and it tasted great too. So definitely something you can get away with. The last thing I've got, fruits obviously have been used in brewing for a while, and you're seeing a lot more usage these days with the rise in kettle sours and people wanting fruited sours and all of the other crazy things. But fruit has a place in beer. I mean,
Sure.
I had a really good friend of mine years ago who made a blueberry American wheat ale that was phenomenal. Oh yeah, and the thing was gorgeous colored. I mean, it was blue, bluish purple. But that worked so well. It had that really nice, creamy wheat beer, mouthfeel, nice flavors, tasted like you were drinking a blueberry,
Yeah. I have not experimented much with fruit in my home brewing. That being said, it's usually on the sour end side where have a base sour beer and then I'm going to add raspberries or stone fruits.
Yeah.
Because not only are those beers, it's the funny is we're talking about synergy and complexity. The beer has so many flavors in it, but they're all at kind of a low level depending on how you're making them.
Yeah.
And in sour beer making, you have the acid and you have all these volatile chemicals that are in there, and you taste them. You're like, well, I get this or I get that or I get these flavors. But when you add the fruit to it, boom! Now you're getting more than just the base beer and the fruit. You're getting a whole new experience.
Yep.
One of my favorites, I would say, of all the fruits that I've used in fruits or berries or things like that I've used is raspberries in sour beers. I think the dynamic range from adding only a little bit to adding a ton is so cool because you get a different beer in every sense of the use from any rate. So yeah, it's a lot. That's really my favorite part of that.
Yeah, there are definitely fruits I feel work better in beer, and that's pretty standard for me. I mean, you're not going to throw a whole orange into a beer. You're going to use the orange peel. You want to get the essence of that orange. I to be honest, they're with the exception of Belgian Wit, which I'm not even a huge fan of the style.
Sure.
I don't like beers that have too much orange character. Again, they taste artificial. It tastes like a caricature of orange.
Well, what's I would say, Marshall, the favorite citrus fruit of craft beer is the grapefruit.
Exactly. You got
And I have a good one. I think it's a good adjunct, good sidebar story. So this comes like third hand. So is a certain brewery in Southern California that was famous for a grapefruit version of their IPA. Someone went to a trade show and they were looking at different ways of adding grapefruit, and the supplier of grapefruit flavor said they produce the grapefruit for this large consumer of grapefruit IPA, along with the Flintstones company for making their Flintstones vitamins. So, when your spice company or extract company wants to lump in your craft beer beverage product with vitamins, well, maybe we made a thing. Maybe that's why that beer tastes like vitamins nowadays.
Oh,
but
jeez.
that being said, there have been, I would say, of IPA variations that I really enjoy. When you get the right amount of grapefruit, just the zest, not the pith, done correctly with the right hops, it is phenomenal, and it is highly drinkable in my opinion.
I don't disagree. But again, you can get so much grapefruit, so much citrus, so much tropical fruit from hops.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is something about the organic nature of that hoppy version of fruit that I prefer especially for hoppy beers, that I just prefer over actual fruit. Sure. I had a buddy make a beer with orange juice, and it was horrendous. It did not taste good to me. It had this weird bitter flavor. There are certain things that, again, they just doesn't work. Another thing that people are throwing at beers that I think is, again, we're in the season, are vegetables. Now, we're not talking about carrots and stuff, though I'm sure somebody has done that. So right now, the season is, it's fall. So the most common vegetable that I think we're seeing used is pumpkin. And, there's a lot of talk about, you don't even need to use pumpkin to make these pumpkin spice beers. You just need the spicing. But there are still people, it doesn't matter, who will either go buy some Libby's pumpkin mush,
Well,
and use that, or maybe toast it up a little bit and throw that in their beer, or go get sugar pumpkins and cut those up and toast them up and put them in their beer. I don't understand it, because to me, I'm in the camp, if you're going to make a pumpkin spice beer, which I'm probably not going to drink anyways, I think people are mostly after the spicing. I don't think they're after that really earthy, raw pumpkin flavor. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think so. That statement about Libby's is interesting, because if you read the articles, tis the season to publish articles about how to make a pumpkin spice beer.
Right.
Most breweries will actually tell you that is the best way of using it, because the balance of spices that is in that already is actually what people like.
Oh, you're talking about the spiced pumpkin, like the pumpkin
mix,
pie filling or whatever.
Mix, yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. That's actually a common one. Well, first it's it's basically aseptic, so people just add it. You don't have to worry about it, and people like the processing of it. I'd say, again, we're going to go back to the brewery. That when the brewery opened up, or released in the first few years of it, when they wanted to do a fall spice beer, they did a beer called Autumn Maple, but they used yams and they roasted them. So they're adding their own twist on those sugars and roasting and adding new flavors. And that's really the great part of it. It's taking this kind of, pumpkin beers, really? And a lot of people also complain pumpkin beers coming out in like August. Are we really talking about pumpkins anymore at that point?
Yeah, right.
But they're taking that kind of style and making it their own and making a pretty nice version of it. So
yeah, I've had Autumn Maple. Again, brewery's dope. I mean, they're so good.
Yeah.
A great beer. Another vegetable that you're seeing, I feel like it kind of had its heyday and now it's not as popular, but you still see people throwing peppers at beers, jalapenos or habanero beer, stuff like that. Oddly enough, as much of a non-weird beer guy that I am, I sort of like the blend of a nice, the heat of a nice chili pepper in a like a Pilsner or something like that.
Yeah, I like spices, and I've gotten more of a taste for hot sauces. Still not on the spice beer or hot. A beer that has heat trained. I think a little bit is really nice, a little accent, but pretty light. There's definitely a few breweries around me that. The brewers themselves really like hot stuff, so they really amp it up in their quote unquote cask beer versions of hot beers. But I did say one of the more famous ones was from Stone, 2 beers called Crime and Punishment, where they aged some stout, some bigger barrel aged beers on really, really hot peppers. And I can tell you, I did not try those, and I do not wish to try them.
See, I like heat. I'm a weirdo like that. My buddies make fun of me because I one time drunkenly said I like mouth pain. And there's something about that feeling that I guess it's the endorphins. But again, I'm speaking of styles. I do feel like chili peppers work better personally in certain styles. I'm not a big fan of that heat. And the chili flavor when it's melded with a phenolic POF positive Belgian strain. It doesn't do anything for me. I don't like the way that feels. Some people love it. For me, if you're going to add an adjunct like jalapenos or habanero or whatever, I want it to be in a really nice, clean, everything else out of the way so that I can sort of enjoy and appreciate the chili pepper part of it. So that's just my subjective preference. I will tell you this. I am nowhere near a fan of chili pepper beers to make one myself. The processing, the cutting up of the peppers, adding it, doing all of that, just not my jam to have 5 gallons of hot beer on tap that my neighbors probably aren't going to help me drink. So, but I do, I do enjoy them occasionally. Certainly not something I'm going to drink pint by pint, but it can be good. Well, so far we've talked about the use of what we'll call acceptable adjuncts, things that I think people view as not being too crazy. It's unique, but not so far out of bounds as to make you question the sanity of the person brewing the beer. When we come back from this break, we'll move into talking about adjuncts that are arguably a bit weirder. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Exchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Exchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. The brew in a bag method has blown up over the last few years, and in that time, it's become very clear that not all bags are created equal. For the best BIAV experience, you have got to go with the Brew Bag. Made from high-quality, food-safe polyester, the Brew Bag is available in both 210 micron for standard brew in a bag, as well as 400 micron, which works beautifully for all-in-one recirculating systems. I've been a Brew Bag user for years and wouldn't brew without it. Head over to brewinabag.com to get the fabric filter that works for you and use promo code TBP17 at checkout to receive a discount. Again, that's brewinabag.com. One of the most common things new brewers do is design a recipe that has, 15 grains, 6 hop varieties, their hope being to create the next best thing, though the results are usually far from. I'm not talking crap on these people. I definitely made this mistake, and I like to think that I learned from it. These days, however, brewers are doing far nuttier things than just adding a few too many roasted grains to a batch.
Yeah, I would say I'm trying to kind of capture the timing of this. The early 2000s rise of a craft brewing scene. We're definitely trying to do extreme beers. I would say Dogfish Head being kind of the real top tier of the extreme beer category, really doing new stuff, but also putting a lot of story behind it, because I think Sam Calagione, of any modern brewer, one of the best marketers of brewing too. And so really putting stories behind like Worldwide Stout and the Theobroma and all these beers that added weird ingredients. I think Midas Touch was just like an old recipe with wine grapes and all this stuff.
Honey and weird stuff.
Just wild things, right? So really, but putting it in a very drinkable beverage, or at least, people do want to drink it and sell it and buy it, and getting good concepts. I would say in the last 10 years or so, and I think it's arguable this was driven by a lot of social media, is adding just whatever you feel like. And that can be anywhere from cereal, like breakfast cereal, to a lot more weird stuff.
Breakfast cereal. Let's talk about that one. There is I don't even know what to call it. A motivation. There is a thought process, that I just cannot tap into. And the idea of pouring a box of Trix or whatever into your mash, it feels to me like the only reason you would do that is to be kitschy, is to take a picture of yourself doing it so you can put it on Facebook type of thing. I don't mean to be judgmental. If you actually think that that's contributing to a really good beer, by all means, it's the beauty of homebrewing. Do it. I don't care. I don't get it. I don't get what you're even looking for. There's one of my bigger concerns is, and I'm sure you've experienced this, Andy, when you're drinking a Brett beer, a beer that's been fermented with Brettanomyces. Oftentimes, you'll get what I refer to as Captain Crunch flavor. It's this sweet corn-like cereal flavor that is caused by THP, tetrahydropyridine, or something like that.
Yep, correct.
That is an off flavor. I don't want that in my beer. Now, I will say there are certain off flavors that can contribute to the full-on character of a beer. A whisper of THP in a nice Brettanomyces fermented blonde ale or something can be really nice. I'll give it that. Yeah. I'm not going to do anything like when THP tastes like breakfast cereal to me. Why the hell would I add more breakfast cereal flavor to my beer? It just doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, again, like I said, I think this is going to be a common thread, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I think we can't ignore the fact that the adding of these is utilizing what the marketing elements that are at the marketing elements that are available to the breweries that are out there. Hey, we went to the store and bought 100 boxes of Count Chocula. We added it. We added it to the mash. Aren't you guys ready for this?
Exactly.
This gets into a longer discussion, and again, I think it's not even for this episode, but of intellectual property reuse and recycling and all this stuff. I see it as a marketing thing. Now, I mean, I can absolutely be corrected on this. And I'm sure there is reasons to do this. In the end, what you're adding is some sugars, some flavors, and you're hoping to capture some of those flavors in the final beer. I would say it's also common in that we added a bunch of cereal as well. We're also going to add vanilla and cinnamon or whatever. So we're going to still bring you those flavors. We're just going to rely on your memory of those flavors as well to reinforce the final product.
Well, and that's what you're trying to do is tap into nostalgia is what I think.
Yeah.
You know, you of course, you're my age and we're of this generation and you loved Lucky Charms growing up. So we made a Lucky Charms beer.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never had a cereal beer that I was like, yeah, this is great. It tastes like Lucky Charms or it tastes like Trix. It doesn't. They're weird to me. And again, like I said, I can't help but listen. If you're out there listening and you have a valid reason for throwing cereal at beer that's more than just a good photo on social media, let me know. I'd love to hear it. But to me, I can't get past why anybody would do that other than like you're calling it marketing. On the homebrewing side, it's social marketing. It's look what I did. Haha, funny. And it's cool. Yeah. I mean, by all means, do it. It is fun to look at. And I think it makes for a fun experiment, to taste a beer that's made with Wheaties or whatever. What's funny to me, I remember, this has got to be over a decade ago at this point, but I was going in to make a cream ale and I didn't have any flaked maize on hand when I wanted to go brew. And so I threw up on a forum, hey, is it cool if I just go grab some Kellogg's Frosted Flake or Kellogg's Corn Flakes, not even frosted, Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Oh my God. The shit that got thrown my way about adding more than just corn, and there's all of the nutrients they put in there and the vitamins, and that's going to ruin your beer. Oh, but it's perfectly okay to use Cocoa Puffs in a beer. Now, what do you think of the rise of so-called pastry stouts? There are a lot of people who are doing more than just adding heaps of sugar to these quote unquote pastry stouts.
So the pastry stout game. There's a lot of guys on the rise of social media, and where this kind of comes out is some beer that is going to be a lot sweeter, the finished beer. And for me, I've only had a few really, really sweet ones. And in general, you're having an ounce or two. And in a lot of cases, you can have an ounce or two of something. And these are really based on impression. So there is flavor. So we're definitely doing techniques and stuff to drive flavor, but at the cost of utter lack of drinkability. you can have an ounce or 2 ounces. So if you considered desserts, like I'm going to have a little glass of sherry or something, or dessert wine, then yeah, fine. But otherwise, it is. I would say that is the line where it is no longer beer. Call it something else.
Yeah,
I would say just call it something else because it's not beer anymore.
Well. So I've had so I'm not a big fan of spices in beers, right? So I'll usually just bypass those without judgment. I'm just not gonna. I don't want to put that in my mouth. There's something about pastry stouts, these sweet, weird flavored, dark stouts or they're not stouts either. They could be some other style as well. Red ale. Pendragon had I think they called it red wedding cake or something like that. There is something about them that is intriguing to me, at least enough for me to want to get a sample. I've never liked one. I've had Mexican cake flavored pastry stouts. That's a popular thing. I've had the red wedding cake one. I've had all of these. What's interesting is when you see people, to get back to adjuncts, throwing in actual pastries into these beers. I've seen professional breweries taking in like loads of donuts and dropping them into the mash. It's a great photo on social media. Is it actually doing something? It's hard for me to believe that it is.
And I would say it can't even be. If brewing is also to be recreatable, I can't believe these things could ever be made twice. right? It's just impossible. I would say likely impossible. So maybe not. I don't know. But I think where I would say in the line that we're drawing with the pastry stouts and stuff, I particularly like the bigger, the spiced, more complex stouts. But again, I'm not going to have a pint. And I think when it's really well done, you could have 3 ounces or 4 ounces, but not a ton of it.
Yeah.
I think what's going on here is that in brewing, so again, we've said this marketing or positioning of how you want to stay stuff, but at the same time, beer, at least in the United States, breweries can only do so much. They do have a lot of restrictions on what ingredients they can and can't add.
Yeah.
So to add an edge, they're going to do different things to differentiate their products. And so I think that it's smart, it's savvy. But I think you are starting to drift away from beer and into some other venues of beverages.
What we got to come up with a name for that.
Yeah, we do.
So you probably know just as many pro brewers or communicate with pro brewers that I do.
Sure.
One of the things that they are not shy to admit is, hey, this isn't a beer that I'm going to sit down and enjoy, but I'm going to do the best job I can making it because
Absolutely.
this is what the consumer wants. Well, if you've got a picture of you cutting up a sheet cake and pouring it into your mash, that's going to get people interested to try it. I mean, it's just the truth of the matter. And I feel like, again, that when I'm thinking of people using cake and donuts and cookies and stuff like that in beer, to me, that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to get people interested. And it does. It looks unique. It looks fun. It looks like you're being lighthearted and having a good time with brewing. And you are. I mean, truthfully, you are. Yeah. I've not had a beer that has that stuff in it where I'm completely impressed by it. Sure. Another adjunct people, it kind of reminds me of pastries, but another thing that people will throw at beer is candy. So actual candies. I've seen, this is home brewing, but I've seen on the homebrew scale, people use lemon heads to get a really sweet lemony character in their beer, which is funny because I perceive oxidized IPA as tasting like lemon heads, but not that's in a bad way. I could see getting away with something like Runts or Skittles or lemon heads. I could actually see that working out. I believe it was on a forum somewhere where somebody did they did a series of like a really simple blonde ale, and then they split up Skittles into the different colors and let that blonde ale soak on these different colored Skittles. I mean, that is kind of fun, if I wouldn't drink full 5 gallons of it, but it does sound kind of interesting.
Well, it is interesting you bring up the pro brewers, and they certain beers they make because they want to, obviously running a business. It's not home brewing. It's we have employees need it, and so you're going to make beers. Hazy IPAs, I think, is the one real test case of this, was where I'm never going to do a hazy IPA because I don't believe in the lack of clarity and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah,
and now, of course, now they're doing them. I would say Firestone
they
Walker.
have to. Yeah, exactly.
Firestone Walker is a case of this. They resisted it. But I mean, there is something to be said for resisting that change up front until it's, what you're getting into, and then you interpret it your own way.
Yeah.
I will give an example, but I'll give an example of someone. He's more of an acquaintance of mine. It's more about a decade ago, and we were just talking at a beer fest, and I was telling him I was going to make a Saison, back then, 10, 12 years ago, making a Saison. Oh, what are you doing? He kind of gave me the side eye when I'm like, I'm going to make some Belgian style beers. Let me read you a beer he just made. Out on the East Coast.
Put him on blast. Say his name.
No. I'm not going to put him on. I'm not going to. We'll see. He made a beer called Nerds IPA with 150 pounds of Nerds treats, along with Galaxy Citra, lactose, and Madagascar vanilla beans. So, it all comes back around when you're trying to be a purist. Sometimes you got to dip into the kiddie pool and add Nerds to your IPA.
That's hilarious. And I will say we've done a pretty decent job of avoiding getting too deep into modern, I'll parentheses this, but modern styles.
Sure.
It's going to be hard to do that as we move along here. We are in a time where IPA has come to mean so many different things to so many different people. And like you said, I've always viewed lactose as a more normal adjunct, particularly when you're brewing a milk stout. I've seen plenty, but I've also had a few of these IPAs. I guess they call them milkshake IPA.
Yeah.
It is a classic New England IPA that is hit with seemingly tons of lactose to make it taste creamy and sweet. And I'll tell you, the few that I've had that come out good are made by guys that I trust, know what they're doing. They go with a soft touch. They're not overdoing it. There have been quote unquote milkshake IPAs that I've had that taste like puke to me. They're horrible.
Yeah. It's tough. It's an brand extension of New England is milkshake, and they usually, I think you're right, Marsh. They say lactose, but I think vanilla is the important character here because you're trying to make something that has like vanilla ice cream in it. I have yet, even the guys I like, I've yet to like them, and it gets into the point, and we're going to get into the sugar aspect and back sugaring beers. They're making things that are actually they have so much sugar in them that they can be frozen like a slushy. because you need a certain amount of sugar in them, and then you add them to a slushy machine, and then you have a frozen treat. Yeah. That's not beer, guys.
You know what? I'm not one to judge another person's preferences, but we are moving so far away from beer being beer at this point. And you know what? Do it. You do it if you want to do it. I don't get it. How about this one? And I will admit, I can't judge this because I've never had a beer with this adjunct in it, but glitter.
Yeah, glitter. Glitter got a good 10 minutes on social media about a year ago because you can add edible glitter. It's just like a sugar. It's got I'm not sure. It's probably dyed. It's thin dyed, and it can be added because it will actually eventually ferment out or settle out. Guys, like not Third Window. There's breweries around LA that have added them. Breweries all around the country because they look cool. And again, going back to what looks good, is these things when you add them and you stir it, it kind of adds a sheen and it looks kind of nice in a movie and in a video and stuff. So
exactly,
no flavor, just image.
I have to imagine that there was a reason that the first person who put glitter in a beer, there was a reason for it. Some like cause, because I don't know what would cause you to do that other than it looks pretty in a video.
Yeah.
I've never had one. I actually didn't see any glitter beers locally, so I'm not sure it was ever that big of a thing, but it certainly had its 5 minutes of fame. You couldn't go on Facebook or Instagram without seeing a shiny, sparkly, fabulous glitter beer, and hey, maybe if it tastes exactly the same as the milky IPA that you're drinking, then I'll go for it.
Yeah.
Not my thing. Again, I do like the way beer looks, but I'm on the way other end of the spectrum. The clearer and cleaner I can get it looking, the more pretty I think it is. Nail me to the wall if you want to on that one. But those are as we're going, like looking at these different grades of adjuncts, I would say that breakfast cereal, things like donuts and cake and candy and glitter, those are really odd adjuncts, but you can make them work, I guess, if you're clever enough and if you're artistic enough to blend them into the beer. You pick the right styles at the very least. There are some things that I've seen in beer that make absolutely zero sense to me, and I would toss into the basket of borderline stupid. What are you doing?
I think the first one that came to mind 100% for social media reasons only was the Vail fried chicken double IPA. They put, no joke, actual fried chicken into the mash tun. Why
would you do that?
Why?
It makes no sense. Not only does that sound fucking gross. And I love fried chicken. Don't get me wrong. I want it on a plate though, not in my beer. There is so much grease on fried chicken. I mean, the impact on so many other aspects of the beer, it just seems like a lose-lose. I mean, but did people like it? Did you get to try that?
I'm sure it was
beer,
popular. No, of course not. No, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it sold well and everything. It's got a we don't really talk about Untapped very much on the show, but it has a 4 out of 5 on Untapped, which is probably not great for double dry hopped IPA. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure they sold it.
Oh my God, fried chicken. So I was at a conference a few years ago, and everybody loves Annie Johnson. She's one of the best brewers of Czech Pilsner. Her Czech Pilsner is money. One of my favorite homebrewed beers I've ever had. She's just a wonderful person in general. Well, her club was, I think they were just trying to be kitschy and fun, and they did a great job of it. They made a pork chop beer. Yeah, it was as terrible as it freaking sounds. I'm telling you, it tasted like meat, which is not a flavor that I associate with good beer. It was one of those ones where you get a sample and you laugh about it the whole time. Just didn't do it for me. I know people out there like to have fun. I think even Annie herself was like, "Yeah, it's not as bad as we thought it'd be."
Well, like you said about cereal, and it's a negative flavor in certain sour and Brett beers. Meat is autolysis. That's how you get meaty flavor
exactly
in like vegan and vegetarian cooking. So you want a autolyzed pale ale? No, thank you. Yeah.
Well, and you think about savory aspects of the beer drinking experience. So I was talking with Paul about this when we were brewing at his house the other day. We were just talking about different hop chronicles from the past, and Summit came up. Summit hops. Andy, what is Summit associated with in your mind when you think of savory?
Garlic and onion.
Garlic and onion.
Yeah.
a little hint of garlic and onion in mid palate. So if and to me, I get that when I use something like Summit around the 30-minute mark in the boil, just a little whisper of it can actually really amplify the fruitier characteristics of a beer and bring in kind of a danky thing that can be very, very pleasant. If I'm going to get savory in a beer, I want it from that way. I want it from the hops. I don't want pork chops. I don't want fried chicken or whatever else. It just doesn't work to me. It tastes like autolyzed yeast, or what I associate with dead yeast, And not my thing at all. What's really interesting as we're talking about this, I can't help but think about the historical oyster stout, right?
Yeah.
And that is a very real thing. In fact, Michael Jackson wrote that London's Hamerton Brewery first added canned oyster concentrate to stout way back in 1938. So this is nothing new, adding meat to beer. Yeah. And I believe, if I'm correct on this, I believe that the reason Hamerton did that was, again, it was a marketing thing. They wanted to make the beer appear more nourishing, like it had, it was better for you than just regular non-oyster beer. I've never had an oyster stout, but there are definitely people who like to honor tradition these days, professional breweries who are still making oyster stout. And I've heard good things, actually.
Yeah. And there's another example of, I was looking at that too, and it looked like there was definitely a marketing element to Guinness and oysters. It's a meal. It's a full meal.
Right.
We've completely divorced beer from nutrition, which I think is a whole nother topic, because so much of beer brewing before in some period of time, it was actually carbohydrates for you to eat to like sustain yourself. Right. Now beer is strictly it is not for food. It is not for your nourishment. It is a alcoholic beverage. You should drink in moderation and stuff like that. Before, there's a different time. And so I can see that element where it's like, hey, you have your oysters, you have your beer. It's a full meal.
Yeah.
But there's another type of oyster out there, Marshall, the Rocky Mountain oyster. Wynkoop Brewing that made a Rocky Mountain oyster stout. And this was a few years ago. But again, when there's a will, there's a way, and people put out whatever they want in beer. So,
well, I'll tell you what. The final adjunct on my list in what I'm calling the stupid and likely gross category here. A local brewer in town, Zach's Brewing, and again, I've not tried these beers. I haven't had the pleasure of doing this, but Stephen Zach, is known for using different types of cheese in his beer. And from what I've heard, apparently it's pretty good. He's got like a blue cheese pale ale and like a Gouda something or other. And it's, that's part of his the thing that he does that's unique, and nobody else in town is making cheese beers. But I guess I can. There's so much fat in cheese that the technical part of me,
it gets worrisome.
You know what I mean? Are you going to affect head retention? Is it going to leave a slickness on your palate? But from what I've heard, it's not bad, and I do love the idea of eating cheese with a nice bitter IPA. Like a blue cheese with a nice bitter IPA. That works for me, and I'd be curious to try it. I'm hoping to make it down there once this whole coronavirus thing lets up a bit.
Yeah. I think we had done a Jersey and Tim with someone did a mead, but they added cream cheese. And he said it turned out really well. So so I'm surprised. And hey, if you guys liked it, maybe I'll give it a shot now.
Yeah, it's not something again that I plan on doing, in part because when I spend 3-4 hours brewing a batch, I don't want to take that big of a risk. I definitely will not be throwing fried chicken or pork chops at my beer ever. I guess I might be able to be convinced to do oysters because of the history behind it, not Rocky Mountain oysters. But
sure.
I think we'd be remiss not to hit on one of the, I guess it's kind of a accumulation of adjuncts that are going into, you mentioned earlier, these slushy beers. I have seen so many posts on social media of cans that are sitting on a shelf that explode, that are getting deformed because there is still fermentable sugar being added to these beers after fermentation, and the brewers, for whatever crazy reason, aren't stabilizing these beers first.
Yeah, so I think it's fine to say I think one of the cases are cases where everything's come together. As we end this pod on ingredients and stuff, and we can debate what you should or shouldn't do, or what's correct, or we tend to always go back to make what you want to make. But now we have commercial breweries that are finishing a beer. It may have been fruited, it may have been kettle sour, something like that. But then they go and add back unfermented sugars like fruit purees to really up the fruit flavor, really up the sugar content.
Yeah.
and then seal them in a closed vessel. And they'll tell you, hey, keep this cold, right? There's no stabilization. There's no, sulfiting or pasteurization. They're doing this. And I think that's really the problem. And this is where I see the real danger in not only the person buying the beer and maybe having a pipe bomb in the back of their trunk, but, it's totally degrading what beer is, right?
Yeah.
That's really my concern, is that now like we said, we have to come up with a new name for this because it's so divorced from craft beer or beer in general.
Yeah.
And they're doing it because people buy it. And again, a lot of this we've said is because it sells. It is I think it's a detriment to the industry as a whole to sell these products. I really do.
Coming out fist of swinging over here, buddy.
Yeah,
I don't care if people want to call it beer. That actually doesn't bother me. I see your argument on how it is made negatively impact perception of craft beer. Though if people are buying it, I suppose that speaks volumes. My issue is that it's not safe. I mean, if you're adding fermentable sugar we do that to carbonate beer. I mean, that's what bottle conditioning is. And you're allowing that to be distributed and sit on a shelf. That's a liability, if you ask me.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I have to believe, I made the mistake one time. I listened to somebody online. That was my big mistake, right? Somebody said, hey, you make these ciders. Why are you adding sorbate and sulfites to them? Why don't you just cold crash it? And then once it's cold, you can add your back sweetening, which for me, I just use apple juice concentrate, and the yeast won't wake up. It's so cold, the yeast aren't going to reactivate and ferment that concentrate. Bullshit. I did that. It started to ferment in the keg. I had an overcarbonated mess, even though I keep my keezer at 34 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever. It was terrible. And that was kept cold. Imagine if I had kept that keg, on a store shelf at 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That is an accident waiting to happen. And I just think it's poor practice. If you're going to make those types of beers, my advice is get over the issues that some people have with stabilizers like, potassium metabisulfite and sorbate. Put it on the can that it's in there and make the beer stable so that you don't hurt yourself and others. Because that's the real issue for me.
It's definitely, I think what you're seeing today, and I have some friends in professional brewers, home brewers that turn professional, that are experimenting and stuff. And of course, they're going to do that. That's where they started. But they're going and saying, look, how do we actually make these things shelf stable?
Yeah.
And absolutely looking at that more. And it's something I've done more because I'm making, honey wine mead. And I actually just started a grape wine, making real wine now. And,
You're a big boy now.
I'm a big boy now. It's funny is how much that is accepted and actually taken for granted.
Yeah.
And how little that is accepted and taken for granted in commercial beer production.
Yeah.
Usually because beer has a relatively short shelf life. For this wine I'm making, I mean, you could add, I think there's like 5 different brands of products on stabilization, and there's all different reasons to use them, and they're all understood, and they're not that expensive.
Yeah.
So if we can take a page from anyone else making stuff that's shelf stable, that has, that needs to last, I mean, that is where to go next, I think.
I will say this to close, that I've yet to come across one of these slushy beers, one of these sugary fruit bomb beers. My really good friend, Brad Gaines from Crow & Wolf Brewing, is one of the best brewers of weird adjunct-laden beers that I know of. And it's very rare that he serves me one of his things that I don't start with an eye roll and end with a yum. It's weird because he makes these beers that are just the way that his creative mind, the way that he blends these flavors. So it's not my point to dog on people who like using weird stuff in their beer, what I deem as weird stuff. I think it can be done, and I think it can be done well. I'm not sure I'll ever enjoy a pork chop or a fried chicken beer, but I promise you this. When I first come across a slushy beer, I'll do my best to have an open mind, give it a taste, and if it's good, I'll own that. I'm not going to avoid it just for the sake of avoiding it. So that's my take. Yeah. I do think we've beaten this one to a pulp, no pun intended. Perhaps you agree with us, or maybe you don't. The beauty of brewing your own beer is that you can do with it what you want. If you think a raspberry mocha IPA sounds good, do it to it. Is there anything else before we wrap this one up, Andy?
I think, we've obviously gone around and said a lot of things, positives and negatives. And again, I think, like you said, I want to leave it on a positive. I think in general, you do what you're going to brew, but brew it safely. And specifically if you're packaging these things that have a ton of sugar in them, just really think about where that beer is going. And at the homebrew scale, if you're going to give your friends some bottles, you don't want them to have a bad experience regardless.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Yep, I couldn't agree more with you. And again, have fun with brewing. That's what it's all about. Don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to keep up with all of the beer and brewing antics we're up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.